Have you ever had a moment when the world just stopped? I mean, really stopped. All the background noise of life, the traffic outside, the hum of the refrigerator, the constant chatter in your head suddenly fell silent. And in that silence, you were holding a single piece of paper that you knew with a bone-deep certainty was about to either save your life or ruin it. For me, that moment happened on a Tuesday. A gray, unremarkable October Tuesday, in a law office that smelled of old leather and even older money. I was sitting across a mahogany desk from a man named Mr. Peterson, my uncle's estate attorney, and he had just finished reading the last line of Uncle Arthur's will. My name is Alex Ryder, and I'm 28. Before that fateful Tuesday, my life was, well, it was a life. I was a freelance graphic designer, which is a polite way of saying I was mostly broke. I lived in a tiny third-floor apartment with no elevator where the pipes groaned in the winter and the floor was permanently tilted. My parents, bless them, loved me dearly, but they never really understood my choices. Graphic design, Alex, is that a real job? Why don't you go into finance like your cousin Mark? It was a familiar refrain, one I learned to ignore with a patient smile. My life was a constant struggle, a balancing act between chasing overdue bills and trying to find inspiration for the next project while surviving on instant noodles and cheap coffee. The only true, unwavering light in my life, the only person who ever looked at my sketchbook and saw potential instead of a waste of time, was my Uncle Arthur. He wasn't my real uncle, not really. He was my dad's best friend since college, a lifelong bachelor who had become a fixture at every holiday, every birthday, every Ryder family gathering. To my cousins Mark and Sarah, who were actually related to him, his younger brother's children, he was just a rich, eccentric old man who gave awkwardly large checks at Christmas. They saw him as a walking bank account, a future inheritance they'd started spending in their minds since they were teenagers. But to me, he was everything. When my dad was criticizing my drawings, Uncle Arthur would lean over my shoulder and whisper, "Look at those lines, boy. You have an eye." When I wanted to drop out of community college because I felt like a fraud, he spent 4 hours on the phone with me, not telling me what to do, but listening, asking questions until I figured it out for myself. He bought me my first professional drawing tablet, a gift that cost more than my rent. He didn't just support my dream, he invested in it. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. When my uncle died suddenly of a heart attack 2 weeks ago that Tuesday, it felt as if the world had lost its color. The funeral was a chaos of dark suits, polite murmurs, and the hollow, performative grief of people who barely knew him. I saw my cousins Mark and Sarah standing at the front. Mark, ever the pragmatist, was on the phone, probably rescheduling a business meeting. He was a vice president at some investment firm, the kind of guy who wore suits on weekends and measured success by his stock portfolio. Sarah was dabbing at her tears with a silk handkerchief, but her eyes kept darting around the room, assessing the crowd. She was married to a surgeon and lived in a gated community her life, a carefully curated Instagram feed of charity, galas, and trips to Aspen. They loved the idea about Uncle Arthur, a rich, generous uncle, but they never really loved human. They never came to visit him just to chat. They never asked about his passion for restoring antique clocks or his vast collection of jazz records. They just waited. And now, here we are, in Mr. Peterson's office. Mark and Sarah sit next to me, their postures expressing impatience. They've received their share of the estate. $100,000 each. It's not a small amount, but I can see the disappointment on their faces. It's far less than they expected, far less than the rumors of Uncle Arthur's true wealth suggested. Mr. Peterson clears his throat, his eyes finding mine across the table. He adjusts his glasses and the silence in the room becomes heavy and oppressive. And now he said, his voice slow and decisive, the final terms of the will. With regard to the remainder of the estate, including all real estate investments and liquid assets valued at the time of the reading of this, will at approximately $8 million. I heard Sarah suck in a sharp breath. Mark leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of the chair. This was it. This was the jackpot they'd been waiting their whole lives for. I just sat there numb still. reeling from the loss of my uncle. Money meant nothing to me. I just wanted my uncle back. Mr. Peterson continued reading the will, his voice quoting Uncle Arthur's own words. This estate I bequeath in its entirety to my beloved nephew, Alex Ryder. That silence I mentioned earlier, that was it. It hung in the room like a physical object. My own breath caught in my throat. I heard the words, but my brain refused to process them. $8 million. It was such a big number, so abstract it felt like a joke. A typo. I looked at Mr. Peterson, expecting him to laugh and say, "Sorry, I read that wrong." But he didn't. He was looking at me with a gentle, almost fatherly expression. Then the silence was broken. The word came out of Mark's mouth sharp and venomous. "No way. Say it again." Sarah let out a choked sob. "Number. No, there's some mistake here. You wouldn't do that to us. We're the ones who family of Uncle." Mr. Peterson raised a hand. "This document is clear and perfectly legal. Uncle Arthur was of sound mind when he drafted it 6 months ago. He had 2 independent witnesses sign it." I finally turned to look at my cousins. The masks were gone. The polite, sorrowful facade had crumbled, revealing something naked and ugly beneath. Mark was red with rage. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, burned with a terrifying rage. Sarah was crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure anger. They were the whining of a child whose favorite toy had just been taken away. "Give it what?" Sarah shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "The penniless artist, the one who can't even hold down a decent job at what are you going to do with that money? Paint pictures of it." "You manipulated him," Mark growled, his voice low and dangerous. He was no longer looking at the lawyer. He was looking straight at me. "Our uncle is old. He's lonely. And you," he spat, the word you used him. "You poisoned his mind, cheated him out of his money. I'm not going to let this go." Their rage was like a wall collapsing on me, but I felt nothing but cold emptiness. $8 million. Uncle Arthur had left me a fortune, but in that moment I realized he had also left me a war. A war for which I was completely unprepared, and a war against my own family. If you've ever felt misunderstood by your own family, or if you're curious to see how this tug-of-war will play out and what dark secrets will be uncovered, then give this channel a like and subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. The story is just beginning. The room seemed to close the air thick with Mark and Sarah's hostility. Mark's accusation hung between us, poisonous and heavy. "You manipulated him." The words kept repeating in my head, but they didn't make sense. Manipulated me, who hadn't even asked Arthur for gas money when I ran out of gas last week. It all made no sense. Mr. Peterson, with the calm of someone who has seen too many ugly family dramas, rose from his chair. "Mark, Sarah, I understand this is a shock," he said, his tone professional, but not at all sympathetic. "However, baseless accusations will not change the facts. This will is ironclad. Uncle Arthur was very clear about his intentions. He even added a special clause stating that if any of the heirs contested the will, they would be disinherited, including your $100,000. It was a crushing blow." Mark's face twitched, the rage in his eyes, now mixed with cold calculation. He was a businessman. He understood risk. Losing $100,000 on an uncertain lawsuit was a bad move. Sarah didn't. "But it's not fair," she sobbed, tears now streaming down her expensive makeup. "Arthur would never want the family to be torn apart like this. It was him who made it happen." She looked at me like I was a monster, like I'd written the words on that piece of paper. "Let's go," Mark said abruptly, his voice curt. He grabbed Sarah's elbow. "This isn't over." He gave me one last look, one that promised revenge, before dragging his still-sobbed sister out of the room. The door slammed behind them, leaving an echoing silence. I sat there shaking, trying to breathe. It felt like I had just survived a car accident. Mr. Peterson came around the table and put a hand on my shoulder. His hand was steady and kind. "Alex," he said softly, "I'm sorry you had to go through that. Your Uncle Arthur was a wise man. He knew this could happen. He turned back to his desk and took out a thick cream-colored envelope from a drawer. It was sealed with red wax with the letter A embossed on it. "Uncle Arthur wanted me to give this to you. Just you," he said to read it when you felt ready, when you needed the guidance the most. I took the letter. It was heavier than I thought. Holding it in my hand, I felt a tangible connection to my dead uncle. This was his last message, a voice from the other side. I didn't know what was inside, but I knew I wasn't ready to face it. Not now. Leaving the law office was like entering another world. Everything looked the same. The skyscrapers, the yellow cabs, the people hurrying on the sidewalks. But for me, everything had changed. The number $8 million was no longer an abstract concept. It was a reality, a giant shadow that followed me down every street. It was a promise of freedom, but also a curse of isolation. I walked home skipping the subway. I needed air. I needed time to think. On the way, I passed a high-end furniture showroom. A silver gray leather sofa in the window cost $15,000. A month ago, I would have passed it by without paying it much attention. Now, a little voice in my head whispered, "You can buy it. You can buy everything in this store." The thought didn't excite me. It made me sick. Uncle Arthur's money. Money he'd worked his whole life to earn. How could I spend it on a stupid sofa? When I got back to my apartment, the feeling of alienation only got worse. The 3 flights of stairs seemed endless. My apartment, my safe haven, where I had created countless works of art, now felt shabby and small. The familiar smell of oil, paint, and cold coffee no longer comforted me. It just made me feel like a fraud. I sat in my shabby armchair, Uncle Arthur's letter on the rickety coffee table, and just stared into space. I was a millionaire in an apartment where I had no idea where I was going to pay next month's rent. The irony was cruel. And then my phone rang. It was my mom. My heart sank. I knew this call was coming. I knew Mark wouldn't waste a second. I took a deep breath and answered, "Alex, it's me." My mother's voice was strained. "Mark just called us. He's been saying strange things." "What's going on at the law office? Is it true? Is it true that Arthur left everything to you?" There was no joy in her voice for me, only confusion and a hint of doubt. "Yes, Mom. I'm as shocked as you are." "But why?" she asked, and the question stabbed me like a knife. "Why you? I mean, we know he loved you, but all his money," Mark said. "You were with him a lot in his last months. He said you might have influenced him." And that was when I felt the first betrayal, a deep, painful cut. My mother, who had watched Arthur treat me like his own son for 28 years, was doubting me. She was echoing Mark's venomous words. "Mother," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking, "do you really think I could do that, use Arthur?" No, of course not, dear," she said quickly. But the hesitation in her voice said it all. It's all so sudden. Mark and Sarah are devastated. They're his only real family, you know. Do you think maybe you should talk to them? Give them a share, for the sake of family harmony." I was silent. The fight wasn't just coming from Mark and Sarah. It was coming from all sides, even from my own mother. She wasn't on my side. She was trying to be a peacemaker, but she was really asking me to give in to the people who had just framed me. "I have to go, Mom," I said, my voice cold. "I'll call you back." I hung up before she could answer. The room fell silent again. But this time the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with betrayal, suspicion, and a nagging question: who in the world could I trust now? The feeling of being doubted by my own mother was worse than Mark and Sarah's rage. Theirs was naked, predictable greed. But my mother's hesitation, it was a different kind of wound. A silent crack in the foundation of the place I thought was safest. After I hung up, I sat motionless in the darkness that was settling over my apartment. The phone in my hand felt like a hot coal. I knew this was only the beginning. Mark wasn't the type to back down just because of a lawyer's threat. He wouldn't use force, no. His weapons were more subtle. He would use his own family against me. And I was right. Over the next 24 hours, my phone blew up. First, it was my Aunt Karen, my mother's sister. She was a kind but impressionable woman who believed everything she heard first. "Alex, honey," she said anxiously over the phone. "Your mother just told me." And Mark called, too. "He's devastated. He says you didn't let him and Sarah see Arthur in the hospital during his last days." "Is that true?" I was stunned. "What, Auntie? That's not true at all. They didn't come, I called them, I texted them. Mark said he was busy with a big deal. Sarah said she couldn't stand the smell of the hospital." "Oh," Aunt Karen said, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. "It's just, Mark said you told the nurse not to let anyone in. Anyway, have you thought about sharing a little? Just to keep the peace?" Then there was Robert, my dad's brother, Mark and Sarah's dad. He didn't beat around the bush. "Look, Alex," he growled, not even saying hello. "I don't know what you've done, but Arthur's my brother. That money belongs to my son. You're tearing this family apart. Do the right thing before it gets any worse." He hung up before I could say a word. The messages came in droves. From cousins I hadn't seen in years, from old family friends. All the same message wrapped in varying degrees of politeness. "You are greedy. You stole what did not belong to you. You are a traitor. Mark is waging a systematic smear campaign and he is winning. He is making me the villain in his own story, painting a picture of a cunning nephew who took advantage of an old man's loneliness to rob the family of their rightful inheritance." The isolation was terrifying. Every call, every text was like another brick in the wall that was building around me. I began to doubt myself, to doubt my memory. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last months with Uncle Arthur. Was it selfish of me to spend so much time with him? He had moved into a senior living facility after a minor fall, and I visited him almost every day. We didn't do much. I would read to him. We would listen to his old jazz records. I would bring my drawing board and sketch while he dozed in his chair. I remember one particular afternoon. Uncle Arthur was silent for a long time, looking out the window at the falling autumn leaves. Then he turned to me, his eyes clear and sad. "You know, Alex," he said, his voice weak, "money is a funny thing. It can buy you the best bed, but it can't buy you a good night's sleep. It can buy you the biggest house, but it can't buy you a home." He looked into my eyes. "I'm glad you're here, my boy. You're my home." Hot tears streamed down my cheeks as the memories flooded back. Manipulation number. It was love. It was companionship. It was two lonely souls finding comfort in each other. Uncle Arthur gave me the support I never had from my father, and I gave him the presence he never had from his own family. This will is not the result of deception. It is the final acknowledgement of that relationship. But knowing the truth and being able to prove it are two different things. I felt helpless. My world was falling apart, and I didn't know what to do. That evening there was a knock on the door. Not the soft knock of a delivery man. This was a loud, urgent, authoritative knock. My heart pounded. I looked through the peephole. "It's Mark." There he stood under the yellow hallway light, wearing an expensive cashmere coat. He looked completely out of place in my shabby apartment complex. I hesitated, but I knew he wouldn't leave. I took a deep breath and opened the door just a crack. "What do you want?" I asked. He smirked a smile that held no joy. "Aren't you going to invite me in, cousin? We need to talk." He pushed the door open, and I backed away, not wanting to start a fight. He stepped inside, looking around my cramped apartment with undisguised disdain. "Well, this place is worse than I thought. $8 million would certainly be a huge upgrade." "Get out of here, Mark," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "Oh, I'll go," he said, moving closer, invading my personal space. "But first, you'll hear me out. You have two options. Option 1, you call Peterson tomorrow morning and renounce the will. Say there was a misunderstanding. My dad will cover the legal fees. You can keep this crappy apartment and continue your so-called career. We might even throw you some change for wasting your time." He paused, letting his words sink in. Option 2, you keep playing this game, and I promise you, Alex, I will make your life hell. I will drag you through every court in the state. I will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars just to make sure you don't get a penny. I will tell everyone what a blood-sucking leech you are that took advantage of a poor old man. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to find a design job, not even drawing a logo for a snack bar. You will be ruined. He was standing so close I could smell his expensive perfume. His eyes were cold as ice. This was not an empty threat. This was a promise. "Why would you do that?" I whispered. "It's your money. You can give it to anyone you want." He laughed an unpleasant sound. "Your money? It's my family legacy. You're a half-nephew, an inconvenience. You don't deserve it. You don't know what to do with it. You'll waste it on stupid things, empty artistic dreams. It belongs to those who know how to make it work. It belongs to us." After spewing out those venomous words, he turned and walked out the door. He paused in the doorway, turning his head to look at me one last time. "Think about it, Alex. Tomorrow morning, I'll be expecting your call." The door closed and I collapsed. I slid to the floor, my back against the wall, my knees drawn up to my chest. The walls were closing in. The pressure from my family, the slander Mark's threats. It was too much. I wasn't a fighter. I was an artist. I wasn't meant for this. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I should give up. Maybe peace of mind was worth more than $8 million. I felt hopeless, lost, and utterly alone. And then, in my despair, my eyes fell on the coffee table. There lay the sealed letter from Uncle Arthur, silent and waiting. Voice from the other side. It was my only hope left. With trembling hands, I reached out my fingers, running over the red wax seal. It was time. I needed to know what he had wanted to tell me. The silence in my apartment seemed to vibrate with a strange energy as I picked up the letter. The red wax seal with Uncle Arthur's was like an eye staring at me, challenging me. For a few minutes, I just sat there, turning the thick envelope over and over in my hands. Part of me was afraid of what was inside, afraid that it might confirm my worst suspicions, or afraid that it would be nothing more than an empty goodbye, leaving me alone to face this storm. But the fear of the unknown was worse. Taking a deep breath, I carefully broke the wax seal. Inside were several pages of handwritten notes. Arthur's handwriting, which I was familiar with from birthday cards and scribbled notes, was a little shakier now, but still strong and decisive. I began to read. "Alex, my boy." The letter begins. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and that tough kid lawyer Peterson has finally followed my lead. I hope this news doesn't come as too much of a shock to you. In fact, I know it will. But I need you to understand that this wasn't an impulsive decision. This is something I've been thinking about for years. I know how Mark and Sarah will react. They will scream. They will accuse. They will call you names. Don't pay them any attention. Their anger isn't directed at you, Alex. It's anger at themselves masked by greed. They're angry because they never bothered to really get to know me. To them, I'm just a concept, a trust fund waiting to be dispersed. They visit on holidays, giving me fake smiles and empty tales of their success, while their eyes wander around the house appraising everything. My heart pounded harder as I read on. This was the confirmation I so desperately needed. I'll tell you something you don't know. About 8 months ago, right after my fall, Mark came to see me at the nursing home. He wasn't alone. He brought his own lawyer and a stack of paperwork. He said that because my health was failing, it would be wise for me to sign a power of attorney giving him full control of my finances. He said it was to protect me. I looked into his eyes, Alex, and I didn't see worry. I saw dollar signs. I kicked them both out. I had to pause, a sick feeling rolling in my stomach. Mark had tried to have my uncle declared incompetent. The level of cunning was staggering. That's when I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let my life's work fall into the hands of people who only saw me as a means to an end. I wanted it to belong to someone who would appreciate it. Someone who understood that true value lies not in the zero in the bank account, but in creating something beautiful on a blank page. Someone who sat with me for hours asking for nothing in return, simply sharing the silence. I wanted it to belong to you. But here's a warning, Alex. This money is a tool, but it's also a burden. It will attract opportunists and expose the true nature of those around you. People will change. Families will fall apart. You can't trust anyone right now, not even the people you thought you knew best. They won't see you anymore. They'll only see $8 million. So here's what I want you to do. Disappear, leave town, don't tell anyone where you're going, not even your parents. They're good people, but they're weak and Mark can manipulate them. Go to our lake house in New Hampshire. You know the place where we used to go fishing? The key's still where it was under the turtle rock on the back porch. Stay there. Disconnect from the world. Give yourself time to think, to breathe. I left a few things there for you that will help you make sense of things. When you're ready, call Peterson. He's the only one you can trust. He'll help you with the legal side of things. And finally, Alex, never let this money define you. Never give up your art. It is your gift. Use this money to build a life that allows you to be creative without worrying about rent. Travel. See the world. Love. Live a full life for both of us. That's all I ever wanted. Love you, Uncle Arthur. As I read the last line, the tears I had been holding back finally came. But they were not tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude, of relief, and of deep sadness at the loss of such a wonderful man. This letter is more than an explanation. It is a plan of action. It is a compass. Uncle Arthur, even in death, is still guiding me. A new energy coursed through me. The doubt and fear were replaced by cold determination. Mark wanted a fight. Fine. But I wouldn't play by his rules. I would play by Arthur's. I looked at my watch. Almost midnight. Perfect. I made a single phone call, not to Mom and Dad, but to Mr. Peterson. I woke him up, but as I explained, his voice became alert and focused. I understand, Alex, he said. It's a smart plan. Do as Arthur says. I'll handle everything here. I'll transfer the money to a new trust account under a completely different name. It'll take a few days, but it'll be safe. Don't contact anyone. I'll be your only point of contact. After hanging up, I acted quickly. I threw some clothes into a backpack, sketchbooks, pencils, and most importantly, the digital drawing tablet that Uncle Arthur had given me. It was a part of him and a part of me. I left everything else behind. The shabby apartment, the unpaid bills, the old life. Before leaving, I wrote a short note and taped it to the door for the landlord family emergency. Will contact later. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The New York night was my constant companion. I felt like a fugitive, a spy in my own movie. As I rounded the corner to catch a cab to the train station, I took one last look back at my building. And that's when I saw it. Across the street, parked under a dim streetlight, was a black BMW. Just like Mark's. I couldn't see who was inside, but I didn't need to. A chill ran down my spine. He wasn't just threatening. He was watching me. This was more serious than I thought. I hurried into the darkness, pulled my cap down over my face, and disappeared into the city night. The escape had begun. The overnight train ride into New Hampshire was like a journey through another dimension. As the skyscrapers of New York faded into the background, replaced by sleepy small towns and dark forests, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten a little. Every mile of track was a mile away from Mark, from the accusations and pressures. For the first time in days, I could breathe deeply. I arrived at the small town near the lake at dawn. The cool, fresh mountain air filled my lungs, a stark contrast to the stuffy air of the city. After a short taxi ride, I was dropped off at the beginning of a long dirt road that led into the woods. I walked the rest of the way, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, the crunch of gravel under my feet, the only sound breaking the morning silence. And then I saw it. The small wooden house nestled among towering pines overlooking the mirror-like surface of the lake. This was Uncle Arthur's retreat, a place to recharge from the harsh world of business. The last time I had been here was almost 10 years ago, but everything looked the same. The green paint was peeling, the potted flowers on the porch were withered, but there was still a sense of peace of timelessness. I found the turtle stone, turned it over, and there lay the cold brass key waiting. Inside the house smelled of pine dust and memories. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but still neatly arranged. Uncle Arthur's fishing books were still on the shelves. Fishing rods were propped against the walls. On the stone fireplace was a photograph of me and him taken many years ago. I, a skinny teenager, proudly held up a tiny perch, and Arthur stood beside me, a huge smile on his face. A wave of emotion washed over me, and I had to sit down in the dusty old armchair to calm myself. He was here. I could feel his presence everywhere. For the next 2 days, I did nothing but reconnect with this place and with the memory of my uncle. I cleaned up the dust, lit a fire in the fireplace in the evening, and took long walks around the lake. I didn't turn on the television, didn't connect to the internet. The outside world didn't exist. All I had was the birdsong, the wind rustling through the pines, and my own thoughts. I took out my sketch pad and began to sketch the lakescape, the details of the house's interior, Uncle Arthur's face from memory. Slowly, the artist in me buried under anxiety and fear began to emerge. I felt like myself again. On the 3rd day, I felt strong enough to search for whatever Uncle Arthur had left behind. Something that will help you understand, he had written. I began to search. I checked under the bed, behind books and old drawers. Nothing. I began to feel a little disappointed. Had I misunderstood him, then I remembered my uncle's small workshop at the back of the house where he spent hours restoring antique clocks, one of his secret passions. I walked into the room. Dozens of clocks in various stages of repair lay on workbenches and shelves. Gears, springs, and tiny tools were arranged meticulously. The smell of machine oil and old wood hung in the air. My eyes were drawn to a large oak grandfather clock standing in the corner of the room. It was my uncle's biggest and most complicated project. He had been working on it for years. I remember him saying to me, "Every clock has a secret, Alex. You just have to listen closely enough to hear it." On a whim, I approached the clock. I opened the glass door. Nothing unusual. But as I ran my hand along the inside of the wooden case, my fingers felt a small, almost imperceptible groove. My heart beat faster. I pressed lightly on it. There was a small click, and a wooden panel underneath shifted, revealing a secret compartment. Inside was no money or valuables. It was a stack of old notebooks bound together with a leather strap. There were 5 of them. I took them out carefully, carried them to my desk, and sat down under the light of the lamp. The first one was dated 20 years ago. I opened it to the first page. Uncle Arthur's handwriting was strong and clear. Personal and financial diary, written title as I began to read a story I never knew began to unfold. A secret history of my family. These diaries were not just records of my uncle's investments. They recorded every financial transaction between him and his family, especially with his brother Robert Mark and Sarah's father. I read it with amazement. It turned out that the construction business that Uncle Robert had founded, the foundation of their branch of the family's wealth and respectable status, had been started entirely with a huge loan from Uncle Arthur. A loan that Uncle Robert had never paid back a single penny. Uncle Arthur had saved his brother's family from bankruptcy, and in return they had spent their lives resenting him for it rather than being grateful. The darker the picture became as he read. Uncle Arthur had written down every time Mark and Sarah asked for money. A $50,000 investment for a bogus tech startup. A $20,000 loan for Sarah to cover her lavish wedding. A request to pay for their children's private school tuition. Each time Uncle Arthur politely declined, and each time their resentment grew. But the most shocking secret lies in the final diary written just a year ago. "Robert came to see me today," Uncle wrote. "He offered to buy my share of the lake house. He said it was family property. I reminded him that I had bought this land and built this house with my own money while he was squandering the money he owed me. He got angry. He said something I will never forget. He said, "You owe us, Arthur. If it weren't for that accident, all of this would have belonged to Dad." "That accident, Dad?" "My grandfather had died in a car accident when my father and Uncle Arthur were very young." The family story had always been a simple tragedy, but there was something in Uncle Robert's words that hinted at something much darker. I turned to the next page, my heart pounding. Uncle Arthur had written Robert's words, made me rethink everything. About that terrible night, I've been torturing myself, but maybe it wasn't all my fault. Maybe I should find out the truth once and for all. That was the last entry on the subject. It ended there. A mystery hanging in the air. An accident. An accusation. A family secret buried so deep it had poisoned everything for decades. This inheritance wasn't just about greed. It was about something that had happened long ago, a wound that had never healed. As I was trying to digest this shocking information, trying to sort through everything I thought I knew about my family, I heard a sound from outside. The sound of gravel crunching under the tires. "A car is coming up the driveway." I rushed to the window and looked out through the gap in the curtains. A black BMW had just stopped. The car door opened, and Mark stepped out. He found me. My sanctuary was breached. The moment I saw the black BMW, all the peace I had built up over the past 3 days evaporated like smoke. Adrenaline surged, my heart pounding in my chest. He had found me. Somehow the monster I had tried to escape had tracked me to this last refuge. My first reaction was to panic, but then the images of Uncle Arthur's diary flashed through my mind. His warning, his advice. The cold determination I had felt last night returned, quelling the fear. I would not run again. I acted quickly. I grabbed the stack of journals from the desk, ran back to the living room, opened the glass door of the grandfather clock, and carefully placed them back in the secret compartment. I closed it, making sure the wood clicked into place perfectly. My evidence was safe. Just then there was a knock on the door, not the frantic, angry knock at my apartment. This time, 3 slow, confident knocks. The knocks of a predator who knows its prey is cornered. I took a deep breath, straightened my sweater, and went to open the door. I didn't open it a crack. I opened it wide and stood there facing him, trying to appear calmer than I felt. Mark stood on the porch, a smug smile on his face. He was no longer wearing the cashmere coat, but instead a designer jacket that looked more expensive than my car. "Hey, cousin," he said, his tone casual, as if this were a pleasant surprise visit. "Nice place. A little rustic for my taste, but I can see the charm." "How did you find me?" I asked bluntly, ignoring his greeting. "Oh, please, Alex," he sneered. "You really think you can just disappear? I hired a private investigator. The best ex-cop in New York. He tracked your credit card transactions, your train tickets, your cab rides from the station. You left a breadcrumb trail a child could follow. You're an artist, not a spy. Accept it." Every word he said was calculated to make me feel small and stupid. But this time it didn't work. "So what do you want? You wasted so much money coming here just to mock my taste in interior design." His smile faded. "I came here to give you one last chance. One way out." He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and held it out to me. "Here's a settlement. We won't contest the will. In exchange, you'll transfer $7.5 million to a trust account managed by our attorneys. You can keep $500,000. Consider it a finder's fee." I looked at the file, then back at him. $500,000. To Alex last week, that was an unimaginable amount. It could have changed my life. But to Alex today, who had read those diaries, it was an insult. It was the kind of money he would throw at a troublemaker to make him go away. "No," I said, my voice firm. Mark blinked, clearly not expecting such a blunt rejection. "What do you know how much money $500,000 is, Alex? You could buy a decent apartment, a real art studio. You would never have to worry about money again." I say no, I repeated. That money is Uncle Arthur's. He wants me to have it, and I'm not giving you a penny. Rage began to return to Mark's face. The polite facade fell away, revealing the monster underneath. You're an idiot. Do you know what you just threw away? I was trying to be nice. I gave you the easy way out. Nice, I smiled a bitter smile. Like how you were nice when you brought your own lawyer to the nursing home to try to gain control of his finances 8 months ago. The words hit Mark like a physical blow. His entire body stiffened. The color drained from his face, leaving only shock and disbelief. How do you know that he stammered? Arthur left more than just money, Mark. I said, my voice as cold as ice. He left the truth. He left notes. Lots of notes. About everything. About the loan your dad never paid back to start his company. About all the times you and Sarah came to him for money for your vanity projects. He wrote it all down. Panic flashed in Mark's eyes. For the first time, I saw fear in him. You're lying, he hissed. There's no record. You want to bet? I challenged. You want me to call Mr. Peterson and ask him to send a copy to the press? Investment manager cheats old uncle. I wonder how that would affect your reputation and your company. For a moment, I thought he was going to attack me. He took a step forward, his hands balling into fists. Where are those things? He growled, his eyes darting into the house. Where did you hide them? I didn't back down. I stood firm in the doorway, feeling the force of Uncle Arthur's words. You'll never find them, and if anything happens to me, they'll be automatically sent to my lawyer and a few very influential friends in the media. Uncle Arthur has it all planned. This was a lie, but he didn't need to know that. Mark stared at me, his internal struggle evident on his face. His rage was fighting against his cold businessman's self-preservation. In the end, self-preservation won. He took a step back, a look of hatred contorting his face. He knew he had lost this battle. You think you're so smart, Alex, he said, his voice low and venomous. You think you've won. This isn't just about money anymore. You don't know what you're dealing with. There are secrets that are better left unsaid. Is that a threat? It is a warning, he said. Stay out of things that are none of your business. Keep that dirty money. It will bring you more pain than you can imagine. He turned, walked down the porch, and walked toward his car without looking back. I stood there, my heart still pounding, watching him drive away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. As the car disappeared, the strength left my body and I had to lean against the door frame to keep myself upright. I had made it. I had faced the dragon and I had not been burned. I felt a strange mix of terror and elation, but his last words kept replaying in my head. There are secrets that are better left unsaid. He was talking about the accident. I'm sure of it. I turned back into the house, my mind reeling. The confrontation had changed everything. I could no longer hide here. This place was no longer safe. And these diaries were more than a defense. They were a map to a dangerous truth. I needed to understand what had happened, not just to protect myself, but to clear Arthur's memory. I was standing in the middle of the living room, feeling lost and uncertain about my next move, when a sudden sound broke the silence. A buzz. It came from my backpack. I had completely forgotten about my old phone. I had turned it off, but maybe the battery still had some left. I pulled it out. The screen lit up. A text message. From an unknown number. My heart stopped. Was it Mark with another threat? Shaking, I opened the message. It contained only one line. I'm Arthur's friend. We need to talk. Don't trust your family. I stared at the phone screen. The blurry text seemed to dance before my eyes. I'm Arthur's friend. We need to talk. Don't trust your family. A flood of questions immediately exploded in my mind. Who was this? How did they know I was here? Don't trust your family. It came so well after the confrontation with Mark, it almost seemed like a cruel joke. Was this another trap of Mark's, an elaborate way to trick me into revealing information? The cynicism and caution I'd learned over the past week were screaming at me to throw the phone in the lake. But something about the simplicity of the message held me back. It didn't ask for anything. It offered only a warning and a request. A few seconds later, the number called. My heart jumped into my throat. After a moment of hesitation, I slid my finger across the screen and put the phone to my ear without saying a word. "Alex," a voice said. It was a woman's voice, low, calm, and with an unmistakable warmth. "Alex Ryder, who is this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "My name is Evelyn Reed," said the woman. "I know this may sound strange, but I am a very old friend of your Uncle Arthur. We have known each other since we were children." Evelyn Reed. The name didn't sound familiar. "I don't understand," I said. "Uncle Arthur never mentioned her." "He wouldn't mention it," she said a little sadly. After something happened years ago, we weren't as close as we used to be, but we kept in touch. In fact, Arthur called me about 3 months before he died." A chill ran down my spine. This matched what Uncle Arthur had written in his diary when he began to have doubts about the past. "What did he say to you?" "He was worried," Evelyn said. "He was worried about Mark and his attempts to control his finances. But it was more than that. He said something Robert Mark's father had said had stirred up old memories. Memories of the accident that had taken his father's life. She knew. She knew about the secret." "How did you know I was here?" I asked, still wary. "Arthur told me about his plan," she explained. "He knew the family would give you a hard time. He told me that if you disappeared, you would most likely end up at the lake house. He gave me your old phone number and asked me to keep an eye on you just in case. I asked a friend in the telecom industry to ping the last known location of this phone. I apologize for invading your privacy, but Arthur made me promise. This was too much to imagine. Uncle Arthur had left me more than money and diaries. He had left me a protector, an ally. Do you know what happened in that accident?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Evelyn spoke again, her voice was lower. "I know the rumors. I know what people say behind people's backs. My father was your grandfather's business partner, Charles Ryder. I grew up with Arthur and Robert. Charles was a brilliant man, but also ruthless and demanding. He favored Arthur. Arthur was smart, calm like him. Robert was different. Hot-headed, impulsive, and always felt he had to live in his brother's shadow. On the night of the accident," she continued, "Charles and Robert had a heated argument. No one knows exactly what it was about, but the servants said they heard shouting about business, about money. Then Robert stormed out of the house in a rage, taking his new sports car. Charles chased him in his car, perhaps trying to stop or continue the argument. On that winding coastal road in a rainstorm, both cars lost control. Robert's car was only slightly damaged. But Charles's car went off the cliff. The official story has always been one of tragic accident. But Evelyn paints a different picture, one of anger, jealousy, and deadly pursuit. "Everyone assumed it was an accident," she said. "But there were always whispers that Robert had hit the brakes on purpose, that he had somehow caused the accident. None of it was ever proven. The police ruled it an accident, but it changed everything. It cast a shadow over the Ryder family, a guilty silence. Arthur lived with it all his life, wondering, and Robert, I think, lived with resentment, feeling as if his father's fortune and his father's approval had been taken away from him. Now I understand. Uncle Robert's bitterness, Mark and Sarah's hunger, it's not just rooted in greed. It's rooted in a deep, twisted injustice they feel they've suffered for decades. They believe Uncle Arthur's property should have been theirs by birthright. Arthur found something, didn't he?" I asked. "In the last months of his life. That's why he was worried." "That's right," Evelyn confirmed. "He told me he found some of his father's old papers in an archive box. There was a copy of the original police report of the accident. And there was one thing that didn't match. The testimony of a witness, a truck driver who saw the chase, had been altered in the official report. Arthur believed someone was covering up the truth. He put those papers in a very safe place, where a safe deposit box in a bank in Boston," she said. "The problem is the key to that safe is missing. Arthur looked everywhere for it before he died. He thought maybe Robert took it during one of his visits. One mission, one clear goal. Find the key. Find the box. Find the truth. Alex Evelyn said, her voice serious. You can't stay in that house. Mark found you once, he'll find you again. And now that he knows you might know something, he's not going to stop at just threats. You need to get somewhere safe. Where should I go? Come to Boston, she said. Come see me. We can figure something out together. Arthur trusts you, and so do I. I'll text you the address. Delete the message as soon as you read it. Leave tonight. Leave no trace. The call ended, leaving me in the silence of the cabin, but this time it was a silence filled with purpose. I was no longer a fugitive. I was a seeker. I had an ally. And I had a mission. I looked around the room, my eyes stopping on the picture on the mantelpiece, the picture of me and Uncle Arthur with the little perch. I had seen that picture hundreds of times in my life, but this time, with all I had just learned, I looked at it more closely. And that's when I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible detail. Around Arthur's neck in the photo, hidden beneath the collar of his shirt, is a thin silver chain. And hanging from it isn't a piece of jewelry. It's a small, oddly shaped key. A safe key. It's been right in front of me the whole time. The question now is, after all these years, where is that key? I stared at the photograph, but I no longer saw a happy childhood memory. I was looking at a treasure map, a puzzle devised by a man who knew that one day I would need the answer. The key. There it was, gleaming faintly on a silver chain around Arthur's neck, almost hidden by his flannel shirt. A detail so small it would have been meaningless to anyone else, but to me now it was the center of the universe. It was physical evidence that Arthur knew he held a dangerous secret, a secret he had to keep close to his heart. The $8 million question, and perhaps more, was, where was that key now? My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. Uncle Arthur was a man of habit and sentiment. He wasn't the type to throw away something of significance. But he was also incredibly smart and cautious. He wouldn't have left it in an obvious place. Mark had just been here. If there had been anything easy to find, he or his detective would have found it. I had to think like Uncle Arthur. Where would he hide it? Not in a regular box, not in a drawer. He would hide it somewhere associated with the memory the photograph represented. Memory. That was the key. What day was the photo taken? I closed my eyes, trying to go back almost 10 years. It was a hot summer day. We had spent the morning fishing in the cove on the west side of the lake. That was the day I caught my biggest perch. Uncle Arthur had been so proud. He had taken the photo with his old Polaroid camera right after. And there was the key. I stood up, a thought flashing through my mind. His tackle box. It was still sitting in the corner of the living room, covered in a thin layer of dust. I rushed to it, my heart pounding. I opened the lid. Inside was a familiar jumble of fishing lines, hooks, bobbers, and colorful plastic lures. I began to rummage through them, my fingers grazing the sharp hooks. I dumped the whole thing out onto the floor, creating a glistening mess. Nothing. No keys, no necklace. A wave of disappointment washed over me. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he had put it somewhere else, or it had been lost all along. I sat on the floor among the fishing tackle, feeling stupid. And then my eyes caught it. Nestled among the mass-produced lures was something different. A homemade lure, I remembered it. Uncle Arthur had carved it from a small piece of wood the winter before that fishing trip. It was painted to look like a small minnow with carefully drawn eyes. He had joked that it was our secret weapon. That day, the day the photo was taken, it was the lure I had used to catch my record perch. I picked it up. It seemed a little heavier than a regular piece of wood. I shook it gently. There was a small, muffled, rattling sound from inside. My heart stopped. I examined it more closely. Along the belly of the wooden fish, there was an extremely thin, almost invisible seam. Uncle Arthur, a restorer of clocks and fine objects, had created a small masterpiece. Using my fingernail, I carefully pried along the seam. With a slight click, the two halves of the bait separated. And tucked away in a small recess carved inside, wrapped in a small piece of felt, was a small, oddly shaped brass key, exactly like the one in the picture. I poured it into my palm. It was cold and heavy. It was more than just a piece of metal. It was Uncle Arthur's legacy. It was his trust. It was my weapon in the coming battle. A powerful sense of victory washed over me, banishing all fear and doubt. I was no longer a victim. I had a purpose. Now I had to leave. Immediately. Mark knew I was here. He had been beaten once, but he wouldn't give up. He could come back or send someone else. This cabin was no longer a shelter. It was a trap. I couldn't hail a cab from here. The only dirt road in and out was probably monitored. I needed another way out. My eyes were fixed out the window on the still lake. The boat. Uncle Arthur's old aluminum boat was still tied up at the dock. Its motor was notoriously difficult to start, but it was my only chance. Sailing across the lake in the dark would take me to the other side, near a highway, with less chance of surveillance. I wasted no time. I stuffed the key-bearing lure deep into the pocket of my jeans. I packed my sketch pad and other necessities into my backpack. I didn't bring my journals. They were too risky. They were safer in the secret compartment of my watch, waiting until I could safely return to retrieve them. I paused for a moment, my hand on the wooden case of the watch. "Thank you," I whispered to the empty room. Under the cover of the falling night, I slipped out of the house, locked the door behind me, and headed down to the dock. The air was chilly. The lake was a giant black mirror reflecting the first stars of the evening. I took off the tarp that covered the boat. It looked even older than I remembered. I dropped my backpack on, untied the ropes, and pushed the boat off the dock. I waded into the frigid shallows, climbed in, and paddled a little way out from shore before trying to start the engine. I pulled on the yank. Nothing. A second time. A weak, raspy cough. "Come on," I begged. "For Arthur, please." I summoned all my strength and pulled again. The engine fired, rattled, and roared reluctantly. The sound seemed horribly loud in the silence of the night, but it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I shifted into gear and slowly steered the boat out into the middle of the lake toward the distant lights on the other side. The drive across the lake was like a dream. The cold wind whipped my face. I kept glancing back at the cabin, which was shrinking in the darkness, a black speck among the trees. I was leaving behind a part of my childhood, a place of innocence and safety. But I was also heading towards something. Towards the truth. Towards Evelyn Reed in Boston. Towards an inevitable confrontation. By the time I pulled into a public landing on the other side of the lake, I was wet and cold, but I felt more alive than ever. I pulled the boat onto the shore, hoping no one would notice it for a few days. Then I walked nearly a mile in the dark to the highway. I was lucky to catch a late Greyhound bus heading south. I paid in cash, took a seat in the back, and pulled my hood down over my face. As the bus roared down the highway, I leaned my head against the cold window, watching the lights of small towns pass by. I thought about Mark, about his anger and his desperation. He wasn't just fighting for money. He was fighting to protect a lie that had defined his family for generations. He was protecting his father's legacy, a legacy built on lies and possibly murder. And I, Alex Ryder, the broke artist, had somehow become the greatest threat to all of that. The ride to Boston took hours. I didn't sleep a wink. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was Evelyn Reed, really? Could I trust her, or was this just another level of a game I didn't understand, but I had no choice? She was my only clue. Uncle Arthur had trusted her, and for now that was enough. I arrived at Boston's South Station while the city was still asleep. The atmosphere was different from New York. Older, heavier with history. I felt like I had crossed a threshold both geographically and metaphorically. I followed Evelyn's directions exactly. I didn't use my phone. I found a small 24-hour coffee shop, bought a black coffee, and sat in a secluded corner. The address she texted me was a public library in Beacon Hill, and she said to be there at 10 a.m. sharp. Time passed slowly. Every time someone entered the cafe, I jumped. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I kept touching the lure in my pocket, feeling the hard shape of the key inside. It was my talisman. Finally, 9:30 a.m. I paid and walked to Beacon Hill. The neighborhood was stunning with its cobblestone streets, elegant red brick houses and gas lanterns. It was like stepping into another century. The library was a small, stately building on a quiet street. I walked in. It was quiet inside, smelling of old paper and polish. I found the reading area Evelyn had described and sat down pretending to read a hardcover novel. At 10 o'clock sharp, a woman entered the room. She was in her late 60s with silver hair cut short and neatly trimmed. She wore a navy blue wool coat and perfectly tailored trousers. She had intelligent, alert eyes and a calm, confident demeanor. She didn't look like a spy or an underworld figure. She looked more like a university professor or a museum curator. She glanced around the room, and when her eyes met mine, a small, warm smile played on her lips. She nodded subtly and walked toward a bookshelf in the far corner. That's her, Evelyn Reed. I waited a minute, then got up and followed. She was looking through an old book of poems. As I approached, she said, without turning to look at me, her voice low and clear, "You got here safely. I'm glad for that." "I found it," I whispered, my voice shaking with tension. "I think I found the key." She turned, and for the first time I looked her straight in the eyes. I saw no deception there, only deep understanding and quiet strength. "Good," she said, "because things are about to get a lot more complicated. Welcome to Boston, Alex. We have a lot of work to do." Evelyn Reed's presence had a strangely calming effect. Amid the chaos and paranoia that had engulfed my life, she was an anchor of calm and reason. We left the library separately, and I followed her at a safe distance through the winding streets of Beacon Hill. Finally, she stopped in front of a beautiful 3-story red brick house with gleaming windows and a shiny black door. She unlocked it and gestured for me to enter. Inside it was not the flashy luxury I had seen at Mark and Sarah's house. This was a refined, understated elegance. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with old leather-bound books and modern art. The air was filled with the faint scent of tea and lemonwood. This was the home of a mind and a soul. It was a safe haven. "Sit down," Alex Evelyn said, gesturing to a comfortable leather armchair beside the unlit fire. "I'll make some tea. You look like you haven't slept in a week." While she was in the kitchen, I took the bait out of my pocket and carefully opened it. I placed the small key on the oak table beside the chair. When Evelyn returned with a tray of tea and biscuits, she saw it. She put the tray down and picked up the key, examining it in the light. "Arthur has always had a love of puzzles and secret compartments," she said with a sad smile. "I'm not surprised he hid it this way. Clever. Sentimental. Very much like him." She placed the key back on the table. "You did well to find it, and even braver to come here." We sat down for tea, and for the first time I told my whole story, starting with Mr. Peterson's office, Mark and Sarah's rage, their smear campaign, the diaries, and the confrontation by the lake. Evelyn listened intently without interrupting her intelligent eyes, never leaving me. Her silence was not judgment, it was understanding. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "What you describe fits Robert and his children perfectly. They were obsessed with what they believed they deserved, rather than grateful for what they had. That resentment nurtured over decades turned toxic." "You've known Uncle Arthur and Uncle Robert since they were kids," I said. "Is Uncle Robert really capable of doing that?" Causing his own father's death, Evelyn sighed, looking into the invisible fire in the fireplace. "Possibility people are capable of terrible things when pushed into a corner, Alex. Robert has always had a temper, and his father Charles could be ruthless. Charles had publicly threatened to cut Robert out of the family business just before the accident. For Robert, it was more than just losing money. It was the ultimate humiliation. Did he cause the accident on purpose? Or did he just drive recklessly in a fit of rage, and the worst happened? That was the question Arthur had been trying to answer all his life. "We have the keys now," I said, feeling a new sense of urgency. "We can go to the bank. We can get those papers and get this over with." "It's not that simple," Evelyn warned. "Mark isn't an idiot. If he knew about the diaries, he might have figured out that Arthur had other evidence hidden. He might have people watching the Boston banks Arthur had dealings with. It would be a mistake for us to go in blindly." She stood up and walked to the desk in the corner of the room. She returned with a small leather address book. "I have a friend," she said. "His name is David Chen. He's a private investigator, the best in the business. He's discreet and completely trustworthy. I'll call him. We need a plan. We need to know what we're dealing with before we act." Her call was short and to the point. She didn't mention names or specifics over the phone. She simply arranged a meeting for the next day. It made me realize the world I had just entered. A world of discretion, of discreet meetings, and of experts hired to uncover the truth. That night, Evelyn offered me a guest bedroom upstairs. It was spacious and quiet, with a comfortable bed and walls lined with books. After so many sleepless nights, I thought I would collapse. But my mind was still racing. I lay there staring at the ceiling, contemplating the legacy of lies I had unwittingly inherited. This was no longer just my fight. I was fighting for Uncle Arthur, for the truth he had so desperately sought. The next day, David Chen arrived. He was nothing like the private detectives I saw in the movies. He was young in his 40s, well-dressed in a tailored suit, and had a calm, analytical demeanor. He listened to my story with the concentration of a surgeon diagnosing a complex disease. He reviewed the photocopies of my diary pages that I had taken with my phone before leaving the cabin. "Okay," David said after Evelyn and I finished. "Mark's plan is classic pressure and isolation, but the fact that he hired someone to spy on you shows that he's worried. Those diaries scared him." He looked at the key on the table. "And whatever this key opens, he's even more afraid of it. It's very possible that the main branches of the bank Arthur Ryder deals with are being monitored. But we have an advantage. Mark doesn't know we know." Their plan was simple but clever. David would spend a day conducting surveillance on the banks, determining whether anyone was watching them. Meanwhile, he would use his connections to find out exactly which branch the safe deposit box was registered to, avoiding the need to check each one individually. "We'll only act when we know for sure the road is clear," he concluded. The next day of waiting was torture. To keep my mind occupied, Evelyn took me to see her small art collection. She showed me the paintings, explained their histories. She spoke of Uncle Arthur not as a millionaire or a bearer of secrets, but as a friend. She told stories of their childhood pranks, their dreams and fears. Through her words, Arthur came alive again, and the pain of losing him hit me fresh and acute. Finally, the next evening, David called back. "I have information," he said. "The safe is in the main branch of the Boston National Bank on State Street." And sure enough, there was a car with 2 men sitting in it all day. Very amateurish. Obviously hired hands. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We'll create a diversion," David said. "Evelyn, you can help me with this. Tomorrow at 11 a.m., I want you to go to that branch, ask to see the manager, and make a little noise. Complain about a charge dispute, a transaction. Draw attention. Mark's people will focus on you, thinking you're acting on Alex's behalf. Meanwhile, Alex and I will enter through a side employee entrance I know and go straight down to the vault. We'll have about 10 minutes. The plan was set. I barely slept that night. The tension of the upcoming raid mixed with the anticipation of what we were about to find. This was the moment of truth. The next morning, everything unfolded like a carefully choreographed play. Evelyn, as the wealthy and ill-tempered widow, played her part to perfection. Through a small listening device David had given me, I could hear her yelling at a poor bank clerk. As expected, the onlookers focused their attention on the main entrance. David led me down an alley, through an unmarked door, and down a service staircase. My heart pounded in my chest. We walked through white hallways, eventually arriving at the heavy steel door of the vault. An elderly security guard, who had clearly been persuaded by David, ushered us inside without asking any questions. Hundreds of shiny metal boxes lined the walls. The security guard led us to box 347. I handed him the key. He inserted it into one lock and the bank key into the other. With a heavy click, the small door opened. Inside was a long metal box. I pulled it out with trembling hands. It was heavier than I thought. We carried it to a private viewing room and David closed the door. "Okay, Alex," he said. "Let's see what your uncle left behind." I opened the lid. On top was a brown folder. I flipped it open. The first page was a copy of the official police report of the accident, which said it was due to hazardous weather conditions. But tucked behind it was a thin, yellowed sheet of paper. It was an affidavit signed by a man named George Bellwether. It was the truck driver's original statement taken at the scene. It clearly described seeing Robert's sports car intentionally ram the side of Charles's car, causing it to lose control and run off the road. There it was. The evidence was undeniable. Beneath the file was a stack of financial paperwork showing a large payment from a Ryder Enterprises shell company to the sheriff investigating the case just weeks after the crash. A cover-up. But what was at the bottom of the box took my breath away. It was a single letter in an old envelope. The handwriting was neat and familiar. It was from my grandmother Arthur and Robert's mother. It had been sent to Arthur and was dated about 5 years ago, just before she died. I opened the letter with trembling hands and began to read. "Arthur, my dear son, it begins. I write this because I know my time is short and there is a burden I cannot carry into the next world. I know you never really believed the story of the accident. I know it has haunted you all your life. You deserve to know the truth. That night, Robert came home in a panic. He confessed everything to me. He caused the accident. He didn't mean to kill your father, but in his rage he lost control. I was faced with an unthinkable choice: lose my husband and then lose a son to prison, or bury the truth to protect what was left of my family. I chose selfishness, Arthur. I chose to protect Robert. I convinced the sheriff to change the report. I lied to you, and I lied to the world. I know that I have hurt you beyond repair. I have forced you to live with suspicion while I protected the guilty. It is the greatest regret of my life. I beg you, Arthur, let this secret die with me. Forgive your brother. Do not destroy the family because of a terrible mistake from the past." I put the letter down. The room was as silent as a tomb. The whole story, my entire family legacy, was built on a lie my grandmother had concocted. Arthur was not just fighting his brother's greed. He was fighting his mother's last words. He was torn between his loyalty to the truth and the last plea of the mother he loved. And now that burden has been passed to me. I hold the truth that could destroy my family, a truth that my grandmother herself prayed would be buried forever. The private viewing room in the bank vault suddenly felt as cold and stifling as a tomb. My grandmother's letter lay on the metal table, her elegant handwriting seeming to mock me. This was no longer an investigation into an old crime. This was a family tragedy, a Greek drama masked by the veneer of New England wealth and status. The burden that Uncle Arthur had carried all his life, torn between seeking justice for his father and honoring his mother's pleas, now fell heavily upon me. David Chen was the first to speak, his voice low and matter-of-fact, cutting through the emotional silence. "This is dynamite, Alex," he said, gesturing to the pile of papers. "The witness testimony, the bribery evidence, and this letter. You could destroy Robert and Mark completely. Not just legally, but socially. The Ryder family would become a cautionary tale." I looked at him, then at Evelyn. She wasn't looking at the papers. She was looking at me, her eyes full of sympathy. "Arthur has lived with this burden for years," she said softly. "He could have exposed it at any time, but he didn't. The question you have to ask yourself now is not, what can I do, but what should I do? What would your Uncle Arthur want you to do?" That was the most important question. I thought of Uncle Arthur, of his kindness, his quiet integrity. He was not a man of vengeance. He was a man of truth. He sought confirmation, not destruction. He wanted the truth to be known, but I don't think he wanted to see his brother, however bad he was, in prison at nearly 70. and he certainly wouldn't want to turn his family name into dirt. My grandmother's letter, while revealing her lies, was also a plea for mercy. A clarity came over me, cold and steely. I knew what I had to do. I won't go to the police, I said, my voice firmer than I thought it would be. And I won't go to the press. But I won't let this secret continue to poison everything. There will be a reckoning, but it will be my way. David and Evelyn exchanged a look. What are your plans? David asked. I'll end this where it began, I said. At Mr. Peterson's office. I want him to set up a meeting. Just me, Uncle Robert, and Mark. Tell them I'm willing to discuss a final settlement. They'll come. Their greed won't let them miss out. The plan was quickly put into action. Mr. Peterson, after a brief update from David, no details about Grandma's letter, agreed. As I expected, Mark responded almost immediately. The meeting was set for 2 days later in the same mahogany conference room where my life had been turned upside down. Those 2 days passed in a blur. Evelyn gave me space, but her quiet presence was a source of great strength. I didn't rehearse what I would say. I didn't need to. I just had to speak the truth. When the day came, I put on my best clothes, a simple button-down shirt and slacks that Evelyn had insisted on buying me. I no longer felt like an imposter. I walked into Peterson's office, not as the impoverished artist Alex Rider, but as the real executor of Arthur Rider's will. There they were, sitting on the other side of the long table. Uncle Robert looked older and more tired than I had ever seen him, his features drawn with worry. Mark, on the other hand, looked sharp and smug, clearly convinced he had me cornered, forcing me to negotiate. Mr. Peterson sat at the head of the table, his face as impassive as a judge. Thank you for coming, I began, my voice calm and composed. I placed a thin leather briefcase on the table in front of me. I know you two think we're here to talk about money, and in a way that's true. But before we talk about the future, we need to clear up a few things about the past. Mark sneered. Your fantasies again, Alex. Your made-up diaries. We don't have time for this. Make your offer or we're leaving. I ignored him and looked straight at Uncle Robert. Uncle Robert, I want to talk about the night your father died. Mark's smugness vanished. Uncle Robert's face turned white. I don't know what you're talking about, he muttered, glancing down at the table. I think you know, I said, opening my briefcase. I have here a copy of the original testimony of a witness, George Bellwether, who saw your car deliberately hit Grandpa's card. I also have financial records showing a substantial payment to the investigating sheriff just a few weeks later. I pushed the papers across the table. Mark grabbed them, scanning them with wide eyes. His confidence crumbled before my eyes, replaced by pure panic. He looked at his father, but Uncle Robert didn't return the gaze. He was staring at the polished wooden tabletop as if it were an abyss. This is fake, Mark stammered, but there was no conviction in his voice. It's not fake, and you know it, I said. But it's not all. There's something else. I pulled one last copy out of my briefcase, a copy of my grandmother's letter. I didn't give it to them. I kept it in my hand. Uncle Arthur has lived his whole life with pain and doubt about what happened. And 5 years ago, his mother, your grandmother, sent him a letter. In it, she confessed everything. She confessed that I came home that night and told her that I caused the accident. She confessed that she was the one who orchestrated the cover-up to protect me. A choked sob escaped Uncle Robert's throat. He raised his head, and for the first time I saw in his eyes not anger or contempt, but the anguish of a man who had been consumed by his own sin for 50 years. She promised, he whispered, more to himself than to me. She promised to take that secret to her grave. She tried, I said softly, but the burden was too great, and it was passed on to Uncle Arthur and now to me. This cycle of lies ends here now. Silence fell over the room. Mark sat there paralyzed, realizing that it wasn't just money that was at stake, but his entire family structure, their entire reputation. So he finally said, his voice hoarse, "What do you want? Are you going to the police?" "No," I said. "Uncle Arthur wouldn't want that. And neither would my grandmother. But there will be justice. This is my deal. There is no negotiation. I looked them straight in the eye. First, you will both sign a legal document drawn up by Mr. Peterson right now, forever renouncing all claims to Uncle Arthur's estate. You will never contest it again. You will never contact me about it again. Second, Uncle Robert, you will write a full, detailed confession of what happened that night. That confession will be sealed and kept by Mr. Peterson. It will never be made public unless either of you violates the terms of this agreement. That is my guarantee. I paused, letting it sink in. And eventually, you two will disappear from my life. Completely. We will no longer be family. All ties will be severed. You will go on with your lives, and I will go on with mine. Mark looked at his father, who sat there, a broken man. He looked back at me, and in his eyes I saw the bitter acceptance of a man who had been checkmated. He nodded slowly. For the next hour, Mr. Peterson drafted the documents. Uncle Robert wrote his confession, with a trembling hand, tears falling onto the page. Then they signed their names. Without another word, they stood up and left the room, not as powerful businessmen, but as ghosts of themselves. As the door closed behind them, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for weeks. It was over. 1 year later, I'm standing in a large, light-filled space in Brooklyn. The walls are high, white, and afternoon sunlight streams through large windows, painting the wooden floors with golden hues. The air smells of oil, paint, and turpentine. This is my studio, but it's so much more than that. On the far wall, there was a polished bronze plaque. It read, "The Arthur Ryder Foundation for Young Artists." I didn't buy a sports car or a penthouse. I bought freedom. Freedom to create and freedom to give. With the help of Evelyn and Mr. Peterson, I set up a foundation to provide grants and studio space to talented young artists who are struggling people like me a year ago. Uncle Arthur's legacy is not wealth hoarded, but creativity nurtured. That's the best way I know to honor him. My relationship with my parents slowly and awkwardly began to heal. When the truth, a carefully edited version, came to light, they were devastated, but they also began to see me differently. They saw me not as the dreamy son, but as a man who could stand up to adversity. Sometimes I think about Mark and Robert. I never heard from them again. They kept their word. I don't feel hatred for them. I just feel a deep sadness for the lives wasted by resentment and lies. I walked to the window and looked out at the bustling street below. I had lost an uncle and, in a way, my entire family. But I had found truth. I had found purpose. And most importantly, I had found myself. $8 million didn't change me. It was the fight to protect it and to honor the man who gave it to me that did. Uncle Arthur's real will was not a piece of paper in a lawyer's office. His real will was the lesson he taught me even after his death, that true value is not in what you own, but in what you protect, what you create, and the truth you are willing to fight to preserve. Thank you for listening to my story. Life can throw the unimaginable at you, but it's how we face those challenges that defines us. If this story resonates with you, please like, subscribe, and perhaps share a little bit of your own story in the comments below. Sometimes the best way to overcome the darkness is to share our light.